Thank you, Kevin, from the Ubivis Project for joining us today. We've actually met you in person a few times at some of the trade shows. You've always had interesting stories for us. For those who don't know, Kevin has an interesting background in law enforcement, but he's also on the public or private sector as well. So you get to see things from both angles there, which is great.
It's actually for me very enjoyable sometimes to see just how much uh misinformation's out there, specifically about the dark web. And I think speaking at like the Merchant Risk Council where you and I met, the MRC Vegas conference, to hear it used as almost like a buzzword, or like almost this like term that is thrown out there, but I think very few people understand, and I think very few
Mhm.
people traverse, right? Like you have a lot of the private sector and fintech companies that'll be like, oh, your stuff's for sale on the dark web, or your stuff's out there on the dark web. And I go, okay, so what are you doing about it? Do you have a red team that goes on the dark web and looks for this stuff? Or like, do you have any type of investigative methods for it? And that's where I find really the most resounding audience is usually the private sector, to see like, okay, this is what's out there, and nothing that I'm doing isn't anything that they could do themselves, right? Like
Mhm.
anybody can go on the dark web, anybody can go on these different marketplaces and these different channels where fraud is so prevalent. And I think when you really remove the veil, it takes away the preconceived notions and the mystique that's out there about something that I feel is kind of universally feared in both the private and public sector.
Absolutely, that's a good point. And yeah, a lot of people think of the dark web as this mysterious black box, I guess. So when they finally get into it, it makes a little bit more sense on their side. They can see how the fraudsters and bad
Mhm.
actors out there are really using the data and some
Yeah.
of the tools that they use to facilitate their fraud and bad behavior online.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's funny because there's so many different avenues of fraud that are available, right? Like one of the
Mhm.
things that I showed in my presentation back at MRC in Vegas was the selfie and document combos for sale, right? And people are like, well, why would anybody buy a document and the selfie that accompanies it? And I go, well, how do you have KYC compliance online, right? You need a selfie and they want to see your document. So
Right.
that in and of itself is a means to go around those measures. And there are vendors that just sell that stuff. And it's just like it's amazing to me when people who think like they know how the ecosystem works on the dark web and the illicit marketplaces, just to see like, oh wait, there's these different elements of fraud that like different vendors sell. And it's like not just, a one-stop shop. Like you need the docs from this vendor, but maybe you need the compromised credentials from another vendor. So it's interesting. It's very interesting in and of itself, and then from an investigative standpoint, it's also interesting just to see how much information you can get out there about the vendors that are selling this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's something we try to monitor as well on our side. It just helps us identify like newer trends that the fraudsters are using.
Hmm.
Like you said, the combos with the stolen credentials and selfie combinations is really crazy. I mean, there's a lot of even other fraud detection vendors coming to us that are just needing a little bit more digital risk signals because they can't tell if these are real people, behind the
Hmm.
ID that they're submitting. A lot of times there's passports that are being sold out there. So it's a tricky situation.
And where those are sourced from is also very interesting, because you see a lot of people that fall for romance scams or other
Mhm.
avenues of criminality where it turns out, they wound up sending their selfie to this other person as a means of, oh, prove who you are. Take a selfie right now. And then, okay. And then they wind up maybe sending a document to them, or they wind up sending some sort of ID to them as almost like a verification of I am who I say I am. I'm not defrauding you in this like online relationship, and in reality, their stuff's being sold elsewhere. A very interesting case that I was privy to was a specific vending operation that was online, where there were really three key players in the game, and the one player that seemed to have the most frequency in payments, because following cryptocurrency transactions, the one player who seemed to have the most frequency in payments was an actor out of Nigeria, and it turned
Oh,
out that
wow.
that actor was actually the one that was harvesting all of these credentials and selfies from a fake work from home scam. So they were recruiting people, and I'm sure many people in here have gotten the text before, like, "Hey, you interested from working from home? I'm so and so from Glassdoor. I'm so and so from Indeed. I saw your application online." And then, sure enough, they think that they're getting a legitimate job, and in reality, they're sending their selfie and their passport or their government ID to this person on the other end, who in return is selling it to a larger vending operation of compromised IDs and selfies. So it's crazy.
Yeah, that really is. And I hadn't heard of I guess a good way like that where people harvest some of those selfies. So that's interesting for romance scams and work from home offers.
And even on, even on the deep web, like that's like a lot of people don't realize. A lot of these marketplaces that sell fraud related stuff are not even on the different darknets that are out there, like Tor and I2P and stuff. They're on the deep web. They're on basically the .cc domains, the .xyz domains that they could readily be reached in any browser. So, when you think of one of the biggest shops that are out there for stolen credit cards, it's Club to Card, and that's on a .cc domain. So it's almost where just telling people they don't have to go to the dark nets in general to go like, here, you can find all this content that's out there as it is on the clear web. So it's like if you're scared of going on the dark web, well, here's these domains on the clear web where you can find everything that you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is fun to monitor if you're in the industry. It is fun to take kind of a quick gander there and just see, how fraudsters are approaching, gathering this data on their side and how they're applying it on, real live websites.
And I think that's also something that I feel the private sector really needs to be aware of, because I think it's just easy to kind of dismiss this stuff as being, uh, you know, the cost of doing business, right? Like credit card fraud. Like really, does Visa, Amex, MasterCard, and I'm not naming them to call them out, but these big worldwide industries really care about vendors that are selling their compromised card numbers and information out there? It's like the victims whose cards those are, they're protected under whatever policy they have with the card company for any false chargebacks, right? Like, or any false charges they get the chargeback for. And, MasterCard, Visa, Amex, or even the banks, they just write that off as the cost of doing business. So when you don't have like this prioritization to go after these guys, it creates this perfect storm of a very lucrative and very minimal risk criminal venture. And you see, especially a case of the original admin of Alphabet. He started his career, not the snake, but Alex Casares. He started his career as a carder of selling stolen credentials online before he developed into a notorious administrator of one of the more successful darknet marketplaces ever. So it's just, I think that if there was a unilateral approach where there was more of an urgency to combat the fraud that exists on both the deep web and the dark web, I think it would really be impactful. Just compare it to, child sexual abuse of material or anything like that, where you have these different uh, law enforcement entities across the world, as well as private nonprofits like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Thorn, the Operation Underground Railroad, that are actively going after this intelligence. It's like, imagine if you had just half that effort going against fraud, right? It wouldn't be such a robust, lucrative criminal uh, ecosystem.
Absolutely. Yeah, those are some really good points there. Um, And maybe from your experience, you can talk about, from your experience in law enforcement, how willing are some of these other countries to participate when these fraudsters are overseas, in some more
You
difficult
know,
countries to partner with?
it's it depends. Like, one of the case examples that I could think of is with China and a lot of the crypto exchanges in China, right? China itself had a huge, huge operation going against people that were conducting cryptocurrency facilitated fraud and cryptocurrency facilitated criminal activity within their country. But they're not going to be really working with other countries around the world, uh, if that makes sense. They're internally doing it. I think in terms of, the borderless crime that is cybercrime, uh, things like Interpol, institutions like Europol, those being the conduits for, intelligence and working law enforcement, with law enforcement partners around the world. I think like that is probably the most, that I could think of a successful case example of me maybe having a case here in the United States, but this actor is in another country, but they're also breaking the law in their country, right?
Mhm.
Because for the most part, a lot of fraud and things like that are universally illegal. So if I'm reporting that just to law enforcement in that country to be like, listen, I have this case here, the victim's here, but your suspect's there, and guess what? There's other victims probably across the world. This guy's breaking the law in your country. It's kind of letting them run with it, right? It's like going, okay, like we'll work it up and we'll arrest them here. And I think that when we in law enforcement get out of this like temporal view that we have, where we have to be the ones that are on the jetway when El Chapo lands and we got to walk him off the plane, linked arms to be like, oh, we did it together. I think that once we start to move away from that, where we understand like, look, a win is a win, right? If somebody gets arrested in another country and they're charged unilaterally in that country, and we really have no stake in the game, that's a win because we shut it down. Right? That vendor's gone. That vendor is out of business.
Mhm.
And when it's specifically with fraud, it's just like that's just a drop in the ocean when it comes to how big the fraud, I guess, both the demand and the success rate is.
Gotcha. Yeah, interesting points. And I guess you make a good point too. Maybe targeting the vendors is really the best way to take down, the ability of some of these fraudsters to sell that data and get that out there.
And for it to do a workup on a vendor, right? Even you don't have to be law enforcement to do this because obviously open source intelligence, operational security, flaws and things of that nature, you don't have to be law enforcement to really get a lot of information on these vendors as it is, because a lot of them provide that information to you willingly. Oh, contact me on Telegram. Here's my
Mhm.
Telegram handle.
Right.
Contact me on email, right? Like in what I presented at Merchant Risk Council in Vegas, I picked a random vendor, I picked a random marketplace, and we looked at it and we saw that there was a lot of intelligence that we could go on in the very minimal time that we looked at it. And I think especially with law enforcement, when you have a package to put together to give them, like, look, we did all the legwork, right? We did all the cooking in the kitchen. We put this meal together. Now all you have to do is eat it, right? So you bring it to them and show them like this is where the guy is, and pretty much that's what the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children do. Like that's what a lot of these nonprofits and these private sector companies that monitor child sexual abuse material and child exploitation online do. So it's like if you think of it in the sense where, okay, that has been incredibly successful. Well, why can't that happen in other areas of criminality for monitoring fraud, right? Like saying like we put this together and this individual is in your area of responsibility. And I think for the most part, with the view that everyone has on law enforcement, they think, correction, the view in law enforcement that most people have about these cases, they have to be handled from a federal level. And it's like, that's not the case, right? Like that really doesn't have to be the status quo. You can charge people on the state and local level for a lot of these crimes.
And so for some of the fraudsters that are out there, I guess what have you seen in, how they get identities? Are they going farther than just the, stealth selfies and kind of stolen digital consumer data?
I mean, it depends. It depends on the approach that they're taking, right? If somebody just wants to create a account, like open up account with fraudulent credentials for whatever reason, whether they're going to use that account on maybe a virtual asset service provider in exchange as a means to launder money, or if they're doing it as part of a bigger money laundering operation where they need to open up like a bank account online and start like depositing funds into it and then linking those funds somewhere else and withdrawing them. Um, really, the sky is the limit in terms of how they could achieve it, right? Like SIM swapping. SIM swapping is probably one of the more sophisticated criminal techniques out there as a means to get into people's accounts, right? Being actually able to port their SIM to another phone and then receive all their standard SMSs, be able to receive those two-factor authentication type codes on that phone. But once you have that, it's like how also can you promote yourself or say that you are this person online? Well, think about how many images that might be of ourselves out there as it is, right? Like there's if you
Mhm.
Google our names or something, you might find a LinkedIn, you might find something like that. Well, with AI, it's easy to basically face swap out and do different things now with it. So somebody could just take your publicly facing image and do something else with it. And if you're working with these vendors that also create IDs, it's very possible for them to basically get a selfie style picture as well as creating an ID, just not with your name, right? Just with something else.
Mhm.
So it really, I think when we have these kind of dated views about identity theft and things of that nature, and we think like, oh, it's just your SSN and your DOB, and anyone can run rampant with that. It's like, well, not so much anymore. Like there's a lot of uh, good safeguards in place now where if your social pops up on the dark web, somebody monitors that, right? And says, oh, your social popped up on the dark
Mhm.
web. You should lock your credit down. But it's like, okay, well, maybe I don't even need your social anymore. There's a lot that I can do damage with swapping your SIM to my phone, right? I can get into your bank account that way. I can get into your crypto accounts that way. It's just a very, I think it's a very robust area of criminality, and there's a lot of avenues that people just don't consider. And just the selfie and the docs thing is just like for some people is mind blowing, mind blowing. But
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, you don't know about this stuff unless you're actively on the forums, unless you're actively on the marketplaces and seeing it going on.
Yep, yep. It definitely changes your view of, pretty much the whole industry. And even just hearing stories from clients too. I mean, we've actually seen some major telecom carriers here in the US. They have employees that are, physically in a store like an AT&T or Verizon store that are helping fraudsters SIM swap into phone
Mm,
numbers, help
yeah.
them wipe out somebody's crypto account or bank account. So it really changes your viewpoint quite a bit when you start hearing these stories from the ground.
Well, it's crazy because I had a personal friend that I helped out when it came to his identity was used, and his identity was used in a very obscure way. They used it to basically buy a phone and start uh, uh, a service to the phone at a uh, cellular service provider. So they initially went there with that. Then they took that phone and they were taking advantage of another cellular company's, I guess, deal where if you ported a line to them, you got three other phones. So they wound up going from store A at a basically a chain tech store, buying the phone there, starting a line of service on the phone there, going to a third party cellular service store literally a few miles away, immediately trading that phone in, importing the number, and getting three phones. And then he didn't even realize that this had happened until he started to get the delinquent payment bills from both of the companies. And he was like, what happened? And sure enough, they were able to determine through one company, oh yeah, they opened up the account, they poured it, they wound up having that number assigned to the phone. They immediately went to the other cellular service provider. They traded in the phone, ported the number, and got three other brand new iPhones for the family line. And then he was getting bills from both the initial purchase of that cellular service provider and the phone, and then the other bill from the other cellular company. And it was like, how are they able to do that? Well, when they actually looked at what credentials this individual presented, they presented an ID with this person's information on it, but the picture of the fraudster who had turned it over. And then it turned out that his ID was actually leaked from a data breach from another company, which is how they got a hold of the ID, and they were able to
Oh,
put
wow.
the image of the fraudster on that ID. So it's crazy
It is.
when,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think moral of the story is don't underestimate the fraudsters.
yeah. And if you just think of that being an operation, right? Like literally, if you just think of one person doing that, now you got three brand new iPhones that you just
Hmm.
take the SIM out and you could sell those, right? And maybe that's what their end goal was to just have the three brand new iPhones and try to sell those. So, yeah, crazy.
Absolutely. It is. It is. And yeah, I mean, kind of going back to what you were talking about too before. I mean, I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize a lot of these these fraud groups are maybe not as big as people think. It's typically the same group of people, maybe even one person in some situations that are, carrying out this fraud. They're going back to, use that stolen credit card as a different person, maybe each time, like they're using a different device. They might be on a different proxy connection. But
Mhm.
behind the scenes, at least from the signals that we can see on our side, it's typically the same person, masking their device as something else.
Which is also not as hard as people think. And I think that we give these actors a lot more credit than they deserve. I think that we've kind of built up this image, and it's also due in part to, you know, pop culture, and it's also due in part to the way it's commercialized. But we kind of build up this persona of these actors as being these hooded hackers that have
Mhm.
some sort of skill set that are running lines, command line, and running Linux and doing all this stuff as a means to facilitate this fraud when it's really not true at all. In fact, I think that we need to really break the perception that's out there about who is being successful doing this. And it's
Right.
not those hooded hackers, man. It's it's the street level criminals that you wouldn't even suspect.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And on a lot of these forums, there's guides that teach them how to do this. Sometimes they're purchasing those guides, but maybe it's like $20, $50, and the ROI they can make on that is, you know, the limit basically. Sky's the limit on that. So,
And like things that we don't even think about, like cookies for sale or push tokens for sale, right?
mhm,
Like when you go on those forums, it's like that's big business too. That's ways that people do it. People who just sell compromised email accounts, right? That's
mhm.
big business as well. And again, like me just buying a compromised Gmail, like what am I going to do with that if I'm just buying it for as a compromised Gmail? But also this Gmail has some traction on it. So if I'm using that Gmail in any type of fraud, whatever algorithms that these preventative fraud measures are in place, they're going to detect that this is a true email and that this email might be associated with other data breaches. So this is likely
Right.
a true person on the end, as opposed to me creating a Gmail like Mike 6 1 2 3 4 5, like all the numeric strings at the end that clearly indicate that it's a fraudulent email. That's not going to pass the sniff test. So I think that people really need to, I honestly think that, in order to fix a problem, you have to agree what the problem is. And right now, depending on who you talk to, uh, dictates what the problem is, right? When when you talk to the private sector, a lot of it is like, well, the problem is these actors are getting more sophisticated. It's like, not really. They're not getting more sophisticated. They're just figuring out different ways to beat the system that you have in place.
Absolutely. Well, this was really informative. I hope that some of the viewers here kind of have a better sense of the dark web now and the deep web and what's out there. We'd encourage you to take a look, be careful, but take a peek if you can.
Yeah, look, the best way to learn is to just, my opinion, go there, right? Like, I think that the perceptions that exist about the dark web in general, and usually that's equatable to the onion route or the Tor network. I think people feel as soon as they log in, boom, child pornography is going to just pop on their screen. Or as soon as they log in, Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un are going to blow up their device. It's like that's not what this is about, right? Like the at the apex of the Tor project, it's about internet freedom and it's about being able to circumvent firewalls and things that certain countries around the world put in place so their citizens can't view content that might be
Mhm.
contrary to what the government wants them to see. So when you think about how much protection that they're trying to build in place to protect those people when they're going online, you as just a curious end user who maybe wants to see all the fraud that exists out there, one, you don't even have to go on the dark web like we talked about. But two, if you do want to go on the dark web, you're pretty safe as long as you're not just clicking around and downloading random things. I'm fairly confident that you will survive your first venture onto the dark web.
Excellent. And maybe we do a follow-up series where we walk through a forum together. But I think this was pretty informative.
The only thing I enjoy more than investigating and going on the dark web is talking about it. So it is no burden on me to come back.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we appreciate your time, Kevin from Ubivis. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.